Did you know there's a moment in the Bible that's at the very least chilling? A direct confrontation between the devil and the Archangel Michael over Moses' body.
Moses' body? Wait, what? They were physically fighting?
Not exactly. But this story is shrouded in mystery, controversies, and meanings far beyond an ordinary dispute. In fact, not all the details are clear, and that's what makes it even more fascinating.
Okay, but where is this in the Bible? Is it one of those verses we almost never read?
That's right. It's in the book of Jude in the New Testament near the end of the Bible. A single verse, Jude 1:9, mentions this enigmatic episode that seems straight out of a movie script.
All right. A powerful angel like Michael facing off against the devil over Moses' body. But why? What was so special about his body?
That's what we're about to uncover. But first, leave a comment with your thoughts on what happened, follow our channel, and like the video so you don't miss a thing. This story is going to surprise you. To understand this, we need to go back in time. Moses, one of the most important leaders in biblical history, the one who freed the Hebrew people from Egypt, died before entering the Promised Land. The Bible says God himself handled his burial, and no one knows exactly where his body was laid to rest.
Wait, so only God knew where Moses' body was?
Exactly. In Deuteronomy 34:5-6 it says, Moses died in the land of Moab, and God buried him in a valley. And here's the strangest part. No one has ever found the site.
Okay, but that doesn't explain why the devil would care so much about the body. What did he want to use it for?
This is where theories and interpretations come in. The first thing to remember is symbolism. Moses wasn't just a leader. He was one of the greatest prophets, someone who saw God face to face, received the 10 Commandments, and guided the people through the wilderness for 40 years.
So his body could be used for something powerful?
Exactly. Some interpretations suggest that the devil might have wanted Moses' body to deceive the people.
Deceive? Like how?
Imagine if the devil made Moses' body appear alive again, or created some form of idolatry around him. After all, the Hebrew people had already shown how easily they could fall into that trap. Remember the golden calf?
Ah, so he could use the body to lead the people away from God.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is that this isn't just modern speculation. Some ancient texts outside the Bible, like the Assumption of Moses, also mention this dispute, hinting that the body held special significance in the spiritual realm.
Wow. So there's a whole story behind this that goes far beyond a simple burial.
And we're just getting started. There's so much more mystery and revelation in this story. To understand why Moses' body was so important, we need to remember the historical context. Moses wasn't just a leader. He represented God's covenant with the Hebrew people.
And covenant, like a pact, right?
Exactly. Moses was a living symbol of that relationship. He brought God's law to the people. So his body could be seen as something sacred, almost like a reliquary.
Got it, but that also means it could be used as a spiritual weapon for the wrong side.
Exactly. And that's what makes this episode so impactful. Moses' body was a symbol, and the devil wanted to turn that symbol into something that destroyed what it represented. The most fascinating part is that the Bible doesn't give us many details about what happened. It just says Michael, the archangel, didn't confront the devil directly.
Wait, what? He didn't fight?
Actually, he only said, "The Lord rebuke you." This is important because it shows that even Michael recognized that ultimate authority comes from God, not from himself.
So even as a powerful angel, Michael let God take control.
Exactly. And that's a powerful lesson. No matter how strong or righteous you are, true authority comes from God. This story shows us that spiritual battles are much deeper than we imagine. It's not just about what happens on earth, but what's at stake in the heavens.
And all this over a body that no one has ever found.
But was that really all there was to it? Or is there something more we still don't know?
The answer lies in what's to come. And trust me, the story only gets more fascinating. I keep thinking, if Archangel Michael was sent for this dispute, then this fight must have been very important, right? Because, let's face it, Michael doesn't show up for just anything.
Exactly. Michael is described in the Bible as the great defender of God's people, a spiritual warrior. In Daniel 10:13, he appears fighting against evil principalities, and here, in Jude, he shows up again, but in a different way.
Different how? Didn't he enter the fight this time?
No, and that's very significant. Michael doesn't fight the devil directly here. He simply declares, "The Lord rebuke you."
But why did he do that? Michael is such a powerful angel. Why didn't he just resolve everything by force?
Because this dispute wasn't about strength, but about authority. By saying, "The Lord rebuke you," Michael was reaffirming that ultimate authority comes from God, not from himself.
Ah, I see. He was showing that, in the end, everything depends on God's sovereignty, right?
Exactly. And that's a lesson echoed in many parts of the Bible. No matter how powerful we are, it's God who holds ultimate control.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm still trying to understand. Why did the devil want Moses' body so badly? What advantage would that give him?
To understand that, we need to look at Moses' life. He wasn't just a leader, he was the mediator of the covenant between God and the people of Israel. He was the one who brought God's law to the people.
And God's law was more than just rules, right?
Exactly. The law was a reflection of God's character and the special relationship he had with the people of Israel. Moses was the embodiment of all of that. Now imagine the impact if the devil used Moses' body to mislead the people, maybe creating idolatry or manipulating his image.
Like, look, the body of the great Moses, let's worship it.
Exactly. And that wouldn't be anything new. Remember when the people made the golden calf in the desert while Moses was on Mount Sinai? They were vulnerable to that kind of idolatry.
Wow. So the devil could have used that to turn Moses into a distorted symbol.
That's one of the most accepted theories. The devil wanted to turn something sacred into a tool of deception.
You mentioned that apocryphal text earlier, the Assumption of Moses. Does it say more about this story?
Yes, but it's worth noting that apocryphal texts aren't in the Bible because they weren't considered inspired. Even so, they can provide interesting historical and cultural context.
And what does this text say?
In the Assumption of Moses, there's a mention of how God ordered Moses' body to be hidden. The idea was to protect the people from falling into idolatry.
So God already knew Moses' body could become a problem?
It seems so. This just reinforces the idea that the dispute over his body had far greater implications than we imagine.
Now that you mention it, I'm remembering Moses never entered the Promised Land, right?
That's right. He led the people to its entrance, but it was Joshua who took them in.
And was there any significance to that?
Yes, many theologians see it as a transition. Moses represents the law, and Joshua, whose Hebrew name is Yeshua, represents salvation. It's almost a foreshadowing of Jesus Christ, who would lead people to the spiritual promised land.
Wow. So even in that, Moses was a very powerful symbolic figure.
Exactly. And this only reinforces why his body held so much spiritual value.
The more we talk about this, the more I realize this dispute wasn't just about Moses. It was about what he represented, both to the people of Israel and the greater spiritual plan.
Exactly. Moses was a symbol of obedience, sacrifice, and the covenant between God and his people, and the devil wanted to turn that into a tool for destruction and deception.
It makes me think about how often good things can be used in the wrong way if we're not careful.
It's a timeless lesson. This story reminds us that spiritual battles aren't just visible. Many times they're happening where we least expect it.
And it seems like this story is far from over.
It hasn't even started, actually. What's coming next will make things even more intense.
I'm starting to understand better. Moses was such an important figure with all that spiritual weight. But what still intrigues me is, why did the devil want to get so involved in this? Like, why didn't he just ignore the body?
Good question. To answer that, we need to understand what the devil represents in the biblical narrative. He's not just any enemy. He's the accuser, the opposer of God's plan.
Accuser, is that like a title?
Exactly. The word Satan comes from the Hebrew Satan, which means adversary or accuser. In the book of Job, for instance, he appears accusing Job before God, questioning his loyalty.
So he's kind of like the prosecutor in the heavenly court, trying to find flaws in God's people.
That's right. And he's also described as a deceiver, someone who distorts the truth to lead people astray. Now think about it. Moses' body, if misused, could have been a powerful weapon to cause confusion among the people of Israel.
Ah, so he wasn't interested in the body itself, but in what he could do with it.
Exactly. That's the essence of the devil's strategies. He takes something good, something God created, and tries to distort it to cause destruction and separation.
This reminds me, if the devil is the accuser, could he have wanted to use Moses' body to discredit everything Moses did?
You can bet on it. One of the devil's most common tactics is trying to destroy the legacy of the people God uses. We see this with other biblical characters too.
Like who?
For example, David. He was a man after God's own heart, but the devil tried to use his sins, like the affair with Bathsheba, to tarnish his reputation. Or Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times, something that could have completely destroyed his ministry.
Ah, I see. So the goal is always to highlight flaws or create something that makes people doubt God's plan.
Exactly. And with Moses, the target was even bigger because he symbolized the law, obedience, and commitment to God.
Okay, so this dispute between Michael and the devil wasn't just any fight. It was a spiritual battle with much greater significance.
Absolutely. And this battle wasn't just about Moses, it was about what he represented in the spiritual realm.
And how does this connect with other spiritual battles we see in the Bible?
Great question. In Ephesians 6:12, Paul writes that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, and powers of evil in the heavenly realms. This means that even when we see things happening here on earth, there's a much larger conflict happening behind the scenes in the spiritual realm.
So what happened with Moses' body was just the tip of the iceberg?
Exactly. It was a visible manifestation of a much more intense, invisible battle.
I'm still impressed by that part where Michael said, "The Lord rebuke you." Couldn't he just defeat the devil on his own?
He could, but that wasn't the point here. What Michael did was a reminder that spiritual authority comes from God.
So even though he's such a powerful angel, he chose to submit to God's authority.
Exactly. And that's also an example for us. When we face spiritual battles, it's not about our strength, but about trusting in God's power.
That makes sense, no matter how strong or prepared we feel. Without God, we don't stand a chance.
This story shows us how every detail has profound meaning in God's plan. Even something seemingly simple, like the fate of a body, can be crucial in a spiritual battle.
And the craziest part is thinking that this battle is still ongoing in some way. Even today, there are invisible disputes happening all the time.
Absolutely. And Moses' story is just one part of something much bigger. There's so much more to explore about these battles and the roles they play in God's plan.
The more we talk, the more I realize this is just the beginning of something much greater.
And that's exactly what we're going to uncover in the next steps.
The more we talk about this, the more I see that Moses was so much more than just a leader or a prophet. It's like he was at the center of something much bigger, right?
Exactly. Moses wasn't just an important man in Israel's history. He was a symbol of God's plan for redemption itself.
But what do you mean by redemption? Didn't he live way before Jesus?
Exactly. And that's what makes his role so fascinating. Moses was a type of Christ. In other words, his life and mission pointed to something greater to come, the sacrifice and spiritual freedom brought by Jesus.
Oh, I see. Like Moses was a prototype of Jesus?
That's right. Just as Moses delivered the people from slavery in Egypt, Jesus delivers humanity from the slavery of sin. The connection between them runs deep, making Moses' legacy even more significant in God's spiritual plan.
Speaking of that, I just remembered something. Moses appeared again in the Bible, didn't he? In the New Testament?
Yes, he appeared at the Mount of Transfiguration in Matthew 17:1-3.
Transfiguration? What exactly is that?
It's an event where Jesus went up a mountain with Peter, James, and John. There he was transfigured. His appearance changed, revealing his divine glory. And guess who showed up to talk with him?
Moses and Elijah, right?
Exactly. Moses represented the law and Elijah the prophets. Together they demonstrated that all of biblical history pointed to Jesus.
So Moses was still a key figure in God's plan, even centuries after his death.
That's right. And this detail might give us a clue as to why Moses' body was so important. It symbolized the continuity of God's plan.
This got me thinking. Could Moses' body have had special significance because of the culture of that time?
Absolutely. In Judaism, the body holds tremendous importance. There was a belief that the body and soul were deeply interconnected.
Even after death?
Yes. In ancient Judaism, there was the idea that the body needed to be respected because it was part of God's creation. Additionally, there was an expectation of resurrection at the end of times when bodies would be restored.
So Moses' body could be seen as sacred, even after his death?
Exactly. And that only adds to the symbolic weight of the dispute over his body.
Another thing I've been wondering. Why did God send Michael to handle this? Why not do it himself?
Good question. God often uses angels to carry out his commands. Michael specifically is known as the protector of God's people. In Daniel 12:1, he's described as the great prince who defends Israel.
So he already had experience dealing with the devil, right?
Exactly. Michael is like a general in the heavenly army, and his involvement here highlights the importance of this dispute.
So the fact that Michael was involved shows this was more than just a symbolic matter.
Absolutely. It was a spiritual battle with very real consequences.
The more I think about it, the more I realize this story isn't just about Moses' body. It's about how God takes care of every detail of his plan.
Exactly. And it also teaches us about obedience and trust. Moses trusted God to the very end, even knowing he wouldn't enter the promised land.
That's incredible. He could have rebelled, but he chose to obey.
And that obedience is an example for us. Even in battles we don't understand, God is in control.
And that's what gives us hope, knowing that in the end God always wins, no matter how great the struggles are.
And this story still has so much more to reveal.
The more I think about it, the more it feels like the central point of this story is God's authority. Like everything revolves around it, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's as if the dispute over Moses' body was a way to reaffirm who's really in control.
And that explains why Michael said that phrase, "The Lord rebuke you." He was basically saying, it's not up to me, it's up to God.
Perfect. It also shows that even the most powerful spiritual beings recognize that ultimate power belongs to God. Michael didn't try to act on his own because he knew God's authority is supreme.
It's kind of comforting to think about that. Even in the most intense spiritual battles, God is always in control. I'm still amazed at the devil's audacity. Did he really think he could take Moses' body?
That's part of his nature. From the beginning, the devil is described as someone who challenges and tries to destroy God's plan.
Like what? Give me an example.
Remember Eden? The devil deceived Adam and Eve, trying to break their communion with God, or in the wilderness when he tempted Jesus, offering power and glory in exchange for worship.
Oh, I get it. So his goal is always to lead people away from God's purpose.
That's right. And Moses' body was just another attempt to do that, only on a much larger scale.
I was thinking, we've talked a lot about how Moses was important as a leader, but what about the law he brought? Does that have anything to do with this dispute?
Absolutely. Moses is known as the lawgiver of Israel, the man who received the law directly from God on Mount Sinai.
You mean the 10 Commandments, right?
That's right, but not just the 10 Commandments. He also brought detailed instructions about how the people should live, worship God, and relate to one another.
So the law was more than just rules. It was like a guide to living in covenant with God.
Exactly. And Moses' body could symbolize all of that. That's why the devil wanted to use it to distort that message.
It's amazing to think about how God even protected Moses' body. It shows just how faithful he is to his promises.
Absolutely. God had a clear purpose for Moses and everything he represented. Even after his death, he continued to guard and honor that purpose.
It makes me think about how God doesn't let anything slip. He even takes care of the smallest details.
It's a powerful lesson. When God is in control, not even the most malevolent spiritual forces can interfere with his plan.
This story makes me wonder about how many things are happening behind the scenes, in the spiritual realm, that we don't even notice.
Exactly. And this is just a part of what we can understand. The dispute over Moses' body is a reminder that there are unseen battles, but God always prevails.
And it feels like this story still has so much more to reveal.
No doubt about it. We're just beginning to grasp the deep meaning of this dispute. Absolutely. This dispute wasn't just about the physical body, but about what it symbolized in the spiritual realm. Remember what Moses meant to Israel? He was the connection between God and the people.
Like a mediator, right? The one who went up Mount Sinai and came back with God's law.
Exactly. He was the leader who showed the way, but more than that, he was the man God chose to represent his covenant with the people. So if the devil could distort Moses' legacy, he would be directly attacking the foundation of Israel's relationship with God.
Wow. So his legacy was much greater than just freeing the people from Egypt.
Much greater. Moses symbolized God's promise, care, and divine discipline. And this dispute showed that the enemy would do anything to try to erase or divert that legacy.
Now that you've said that, it got me thinking. Could Moses' legacy also be tied to what Jesus would do in the future?
Yes, Moses is seen as a foreshadowing of the Messiah. He not only freed Israel from physical slavery, but also pointed to a future where the Messiah would free humanity from spiritual slavery.
But how did he point to that? Is that in the Bible somewhere?
Definitely. In Deuteronomy 18:15, Moses prophesies that God would raise up a prophet like him, and the people should listen to that prophet. This passage is seen as a direct reference to Jesus.
Ah, I see. So Moses was like a model for what the Messiah would do.
Exactly. He was a deliverer, a mediator, and someone who guided God's people. These traits are perfectly mirrored in Jesus.
So if the devil could distort Moses' image, that could also impact how people saw the Messiah.
Precisely. The enemy's plan is always to attack the foundation so that the entire structure crumbles.
But there's one thing I still don't get. Why did God himself make it a point to bury Moses? Why not let the people do it?
Great question. Deuteronomy 34:5-6 says that God buried Moses in a secret place in the valley of Moab, and no one ever knew where it was. This was to protect the people from falling into idolatry.
Idolatry? How so?
Think about it. Moses was the leader who had spoken directly with God, performed miracles, and guided the people. If they knew where his body was, there's a good chance they would start venerating him as an idol instead of worshipping God.
Ah, like what happened with the golden calf in the desert.
Exactly. The people of Israel had a tendency to seek visible symbols to worship. God knew this and protected the people by hiding Moses' body.
This makes me wonder. The devil must have known that God had a good reason to hide the body, right?
Absolutely. And that's why he tried to take possession of the body. If the devil had exposed Moses' body, he could manipulate the people into falling into the exact error God wanted to prevent.
Like using the body as a symbol to lead the people away from God.
Exactly. And more than that, he could use the body to discredit Moses' leadership or even create confusion about God's plan.
So this dispute was much more than just about Moses. It was about the future impact on the people of Israel.
That's right. And this enemy strategy hasn't changed to this day. He still tries to distort symbols and legacies to lead people away from the truth.
The more we talk about this, the more I realize that this story is a clear example of how God always wins, even in the most complex situations.
Exactly. This dispute over Moses' body is a powerful reminder that God is in control. Even when the enemy tries to interfere, he can never change God's plans.
And the most impressive thing is that God took care of everything, even Moses' body, to ensure that nothing disrupted his purpose.
It shows how faithful God is. He not only protected Moses' legacy, but also ensured that everything continued to point to the greater plan, redemption through Jesus Christ.
It's a story full of mysteries, but also full of lessons for us about trust, faithfulness, and God's sovereignty.
And the deeper we dive into it, the clearer it becomes that every detail has a purpose.
You know, now that we've come this far, I realize this story is about much more than Moses' body. It feels like it points to something deeper, almost like a hidden message.
And you're absolutely right. This dispute between Michael and the devil over Moses' body is a reflection of the spiritual battles happening all the time.
But what do you mean by that? What kind of battle?
Think about it. The devil always tries to use what's important to God as a weapon to destroy, distract, or confuse. Moses' body wasn't just a body, it was a symbol of God's faithfulness, the law, and the hope of the people. And the enemy wanted to destroy that significance.
Oh, so it's like this dispute represents how the devil tries to destroy everything good that God does.
Exactly. And once again, God prevails, showing that nothing can disrupt his plan.
What's most impressive is thinking about how Moses' legacy is still alive today. Even after all this, he continues to inspire millions of people.
Absolutely. Moses' story teaches about obedience, leadership, and trusting God, even in the most challenging moments.
And that's something that will never change, right? It's always going to be a challenge to fully trust God when things don't make sense.
Exactly. And Moses is an example of how even with human flaws, faithfulness to God can leave an eternal impact.
Something else that caught my attention is Michael's role in this story. Why was he chosen for this particular battle?
Michael is described in the Bible as a protector of God's people. He appears in Daniel, Revelation, and here in Jude as someone who fights directly against the forces of evil.
So he's kind of like a general in the heavenly army.
Exactly. He represents God's justice and power in action, but always under divine authority. That's important because, even as a powerful angel, Michael acknowledges that the ultimate power comes from God.
That's really powerful. Even the mightiest angels depend on God's authority.
Exactly. That's one of the great lessons of this story.
Okay, but what does all of this mean for us today? Like, what can this story teach us in everyday life?
Good question. This story reminds us that even when we face battles we don't understand, God is in control. Just as he protected Moses' body and ensured his plan was fulfilled, he also takes care of us.
So it's like a reminder to trust God, even when it feels like things are out of control.
That's exactly it. It also teaches us to stay vigilant. The devil continues trying to distort and destroy what God does, but our trust must always be in God's sovereignty.
You know, in the end, this story taught me a lot about how God takes care of every detail. Nothing escapes his control, not even what happens in the spiritual realm.
Exactly. The dispute over Moses' body is proof that God protects what is his, and that the enemy never has the final word.
And that's so comforting, isn't it? Knowing that even in the invisible battles, God has already won.
Absolutely. And it's a message worth sharing.
So if you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this.
And don't forget to like and share this video with someone who will be inspired by this story. There's so much more amazing content we'll explore together.